President Joe Biden vetoed the resolution. The resolution was to repeal SAB 121. He stated that reversing the SEC's guidelines could undermine the agency's broader authority regarding accounting practices and emphasized the need for balanced regulation to protect consumers and investors while promoting innovation in digital assets. But what the SAB 121's guidance said was around how companies had to keep these digital assets on their balance sheet. So the bulletin required companies holding digital assets for their customers, that's important, to recognize these assets and corresponding liabilities on their balance sheet.
Grab a drink. It's time for another episode of Off the Record on the Rocks. Join Michael Toner and Ankarina Lara as we discuss the latest in all things Web3, AI, metaverse, and crypto. Tune out the noise and turn up the signal as we pour ourselves into the future. Better make mine a double.
Because I just got back from Mexico. And if you haven't been to Mexico in May, June, July, or August, there's a chance you're going to encounter a phenomenon that the United States Meteorology Society is going to brand. This is not the atmospheric river of yore. This is not the Bomba cyclone. This is the heat dome. And I was in the valley at altitude at about 105, 110 degrees for 12 hours having a radical wedding. But when I got back, the fatigue, the sheer just the heat radiating from my bones and out, I had a shivers.
Get cool.
You can't get, but I had like a hot head and a shivery body with goosebumps. I was sort of like totally imbalanced. A couple of days of that and some water and electrolytes and I was all good. But that heat dome was pressure, like the air doesn't move. And I feel like there's a great metaphor here for the last week or and change of this kind of pressure dome over crypto Web3 and waiting with bated breath for someone to say something with any kind of clarification. And I feel like we got lots of mixed messages. I mean, how would you characterize the ups and downs of the last couple of weeks?
I think you're spot on in terms of the boiling pot really coming to a fever pitch in the last 10 days. It has been wild to have seen it coming, to sort of know that these were all of the things that that were on the docket. And I'm talking specifically about, we know the ETF applications that have been in motion, and we've been following those dates, the SAB 121, the accounting bulletin from the SEC, that happening at the end of May. It's all of that then with Consensus, the world's largest crypto conference in Austin, happening right in the center of it. I want to get to my stories there from the street, what I was seeing and hearing and observing from the panel discussions and in the side events. But yeah, all of this, ETFs, Biden vetoing the resolution to repeal SAB 121. It gets complicated, right? Those mixed messages are because he vetoed something that would have seemingly protected consumers from the risks with crypto assets. Like, it didn't make any sense. It was very confusing to most people. And to me, the only thing that I think of when something in DC is confusing and it doesn't make sense logically is because it's political. And politicians have strange bedfellows. That saying is because it isn't going to be logical. It is going to be mixed messages. In the meantime, though, you're seeing a couple of things that we have to talk about. You're seeing the amendments to these S1s for these Ethereum ETFs. I want to talk about the New York Stock Exchange technical glitch and Berkshire Hathaway going to zero out of nowhere. And then just in the past 48 hours, Texas announcing that they're going to launch the Texas Stock Exchange to seemingly compete with the New York Stock Exchange. Seems political, doesn't it? New York versus Texas, ready to shoot them up in the wild, wild west. And it's a lot of mixed messages, but to me, it is Bitcoin is on the ballot. Everybody's had to show their cards with this first bipartisan vote that now Biden has vetoed, has not brought forth. It's going to come back, and it's starting to slip in a few interesting ways. There's a couple of hearings where you're starting to Mark Warner today, Eleanor from Fox, who I got to meet in Consensus covering this, but they're slipping in some of these digital asset guidelines or guidances into other bills dealing with cybersecurity. So it's a lot to unpack, but it is got to have been the most impactful week in legislation coming out of Washington, D.C. Even if it's a bunch of muddy, obfuscated, it's still the most fever pitch that we've seen.
Yeah, and I'm to unpack that too, because it's something that, you sent a timeline. We've been kind of going back and forth. So we've been tracking this pretty close. And while it would seem that that everyone's on the same page and speaking from the same playbook, what we're seeing now, like you said, it's highly politicized. There's so many macro effects at play, right? Even take a step back from the idea of a Texas stock exchange versus a New York stock exchange, right? So it's already like a challenge to the notion of our traditional financial markets, which crypto kind of is anyway. So it's almost like there's this new straw man that's been introduced, which is not crypto, but it's a new economic paradigm, which is not the New York Stock Exchange, it's the Texas Stock Exchange. But it's hard to argue against that because it isn't introducing anything new. So it seems like a lot of folks are pressing these levers in these areas to see, well, where is the sensitivity, right? We sort of know historically, and this could change, that the Democrats tend to favor this idea of a central bank digital currency, or a CBDC, which would sort of make sense that the Biden administration at 5 p.m. on a Friday, let's a note here for the Off the Record on the Rocks diehard listeners. We look at the SEC and the FBI and the US, just .gov, all those sites for their press releases. And surprise, 5 p.m. Pacific or Eastern on Fridays tends to be a pretty exciting time. And when this was this the 5 p.m. before Memorial Day weekend?
It was the Friday. It was the 5 p.m. before Memorial Day weekend. It was also the Friday that the Trump guilty verdict coming out, talk about macro themes here of like, you want to bury something that you don't want to rise to the surface. What better way to do it? I think that's also why it was very confusing, because it seemingly was there to protect consumers, to put some clarity in place. And the Biden administration saying, nope, not right now. And I think when you start to talk about CBDCs, it makes me think that that's the next wave that we should be looking at and really diving deep on here in the next 4 or 5 months through the summer, because I wonder if you have to get CBDC legislation done first before you then introduce any kind of layer 2 Ethereum ETF, clarification around how businesses can transact on these new exchanges, on these new blockchain rails, these new layer 2 financial systems.
And so if you're in the business of sliding through pretty major veto announcements at 5 p.m. on a Friday before Memorial Day, when no one's paying attention, then let's just look at those two things just for a split second. So the SEC is going proactively to all of the big banks. Let's not make any mistake, right? These are not suddenly new players, right? This effectively is the same the rogues gallery of the Bitcoin spot ETF banks. And they're being asked to amend their S1 filings. So, and there was this urgency, right? I remember it came out on a Wednesday that they needed everything refiled by Friday. Right? It was this super hurry up, which of course, at 5 p.m. on Friday, we know that this veto comes. But the veto isn't specifically vetoing what's happening with the SEC asking for these amended S1s. That's kind of, there's apples and oranges, but it's being sold in as the same fruit basket. And that's the part that's wildly confusing. And lots of words are used, like you were saying it. It's for privacy, protection, security. These are the new terms. Remember, when in pandemic, we talked about whenever anyone said abundance of caution or matter of national security, you already knew the fix was in and things were going to be like suddenly they were going to take control of that narrative. Well, to me, it feels like this new narrative is the privacy and the protection for the consumers. So what does the veto specifically veto? because we know that the S1 applications are refiled, and now those guys are hoping that the ETFs will be approved in the next round. So how do those two things coexist?
So the veto specifically would have. I want to read this to make sure I'm getting it exactly right. On May 31st,
specific wording.
President Joe Biden vetoed the resolution. The resolution was to repeal SAB 121. He stated that reversing the SEC's guidelines could undermine the agency's broader authority regarding accounting practices and emphasized the need for balanced regulation to protect consumers and investors while promoting innovation in digital assets. But what the SAB 121's guidance said was around how companies had to keep these digital assets on their balance sheet. So the bulletin required companies holding digital assets for their customers, that's important, to recognize these assets and corresponding liabilities on their balance sheet. And so that's what SAB 121 said, is like, if you're holding digital assets for your customers' company, you must hold them on your balance sheet. Well, if I'm Coinbase and I'm saying, well, wait a second, Bitcoin on Carino's got his own smart wallet. He's the custody of this. Why do I need to keep it on my balance sheet? And that's where, so the resolution was to repeal that, to make it go away, to say that the SEC does not and cannot mandate that as an accounting practice. They cannot force publicly traded companies to recognize these digital assets on their balance sheets, because there's a different way to do it. You can be selling these services to an end user and allowing that end user to self-custody. And that is where I think a lot of this is getting at, is like, you need to repeal SAB 121, and then you need to introduce the FIT21 Act, which then provides clarity of what is a digital asset. And then you can provide clarity on how it gets accounted for. And so all of these dominoes have to stack up. But that original repeal was in May 16th. The veto was on May 31st. Even though it was a Friday at 5, one of the big takeaways, at least from crypto Twitter, that I think that the Dems are learning is that, burying it into a Friday at 5 used to work in a traditional media cycle, but crypto Twitter doesn't sleep on the weekend. They're just coming online at 5 o'clock on Friday. They're just getting done with their day job. These are retail investors who are studying the markets and understanding what's going on in regulation. And they're seeing this Friday at 5. So one of the big announcements at Consensus was the Stand with Crypto has raised or has 1 million signatories having signed their name to say they're going to stand with crypto. And I think A16 just poured in another 25 million into the PAC. I mean, this is a political action committee that is figuring out which of these senators, which of these politicians, which of these congressmen are going to support clarification around the legislation of digital assets. So, that's a better explanation of what the veto was. It was specifically vetoing the overturning. That's why it's so confusing for people to understand.
And it's also the part about it that is, I think, underlying it all for our listeners here is that you talk about the dominoes falling, and it is true. It's about organizing the dominoes in their correct order before the first one is knocked over, because we know that these attempts, these mechanisms that we know the government uses, inserting just slices of the ultimate goal in legislation into a variety of other bills, other places, to finally get the dominoes lined up to knock over. Because it really does smack of still what I think is pretty fresh in everyone's mind. Although I'll say that on one side of my mouth because it's related to FTX. But on the other side of my mouth, I think that they've done a really good job of controlling the conversation, the narrative around FTX, because all the latest news is, all original FTX investors are being made whole. Right? That's the news. The news is, hey, this crazy thing happened. This guy's going to jail for 25 years. A bunch of other people are going to jail for some period of time and paying fines. But every investor was made whole. No money was lost. We found the money, even though supposedly 60 billion was lost. So if that is the the burn down that had to happen to then force the SEC and these different agencies to start really talking about legislation. And that's what really brought us to that point of originally, well, you have to have the Bitcoin if you're going to offer the Bitcoin ETF. You have to match it per these bills you just referenced. You have to have the commensurate amount of value. So in the event that the person says, well, I want to take it all out, then the bank or the institution that offers that service says, sure, here you go. And not like FTX, where suddenly they just pause all withdrawals and there's a run on the bank, as it were, and the whole thing burns down. So there's all this legislation, quote, to protect the consumer, right? It makes sense. You heard about, Mr. Toner, that thing with FTX and all those people that lost all that money, including the good Tom Brady and Gisele Bündchen. And you don't want that to happen to you. So we have all these things in place to prevent that from happening. And that makes sense. Everyone's like, oh, yeah, that's good. I don't want to lose my money. And so then time passes, and we know that the surveillance partner of Coinbase that was supposed to be watching these original Bitcoin spot ETF guys was going to be surveilling them and making sure they had the Bitcoin. But then we get to a point where they finally say, the SEC, well, you don't have to have all that Bitcoin. You could have cash to back it, just like a normal bank. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, of course. Because we're not selling a Bitcoin. We're selling an ETF, an exchange traded fund, an IOU. So we don't need the actual Bitcoin. We'll just buy that later. Okay, that makes sense. So now, so similarly, there is this same lining up of dominoes with Ethereum spot ETFs. But I think necessarily everyone is a little nervous about hitting that first domino because of the wild unknown, which is Ethereum is a company that has people who are corruptible and could do things to manipulate laws as written. Bitcoin doesn't, because it's a protocol, it's an algorithm. So I think what you're seeing is that politicization of that, like you said, but kind of slowing down the inevitable. Like I think you said it before anybody on this show, certainly, which is the spot ETF is coming for Ethereum. It's coming. It's just a question of how and when. I think we all got that rush of the when, but then May 23rd or whatever date went by, and now the how is really playing out. Yeah. And I don't know my exact date on this, but the next checkpoint, it's at sometime by the end of June when they're supposed to have another decision. I forget the exact date.
I'll need to check. I don't have the calendar in front of me, but I know that Gary Gensler went on Squawk Box or one of the morning shows the other day and said that it will take some time, that he believes that the Ethereum ETF will take some time. But again, signaling that there is, I think, a consensus that it will get approved. I think Australia just approved their Ethereum ETF. Yeah. So when it's in that kind of a global marketplace, kind of hard to argue that we wouldn't get it approved. I just think that some of those other dominoes do have to do with the layer twos that are built on top of Ethereum, your Polygons, your Optimism, your Base, where you now have.
And how about every money. Other crazy altcoin that's also built on there? Like it's not just Ethereum; it's sort of a whole family of things you're effectively ordaining as okay. Right. And then just to kind of pop us into this modern news, because obviously we don't know any answers today. We believe the ETF for Ethereum is coming. We believe they're going to have to figure out just a little bit of the detail of, well, probably very similar to the Bitcoin ETF, right? You'll have to keep some amount of Ethereum and cash on your balance sheets. Will that match the FDIC someday? We all know that FDIC compliance means you have to keep $250,000 per customer. We know that crypto can go way higher than $250,000 per retail person, depending on the time of day, depending on how much Pepe you're holding. And then as I think about that, there's all these other factors that are coming in the macro. Maybe this can pulse into some newer stories, but there's been a lot of news, a lot of moving and shaking with our pals Andreessen Horowitz and their cronies. And we know they have the A16Z, which is the Andreessen Horowitz crypto fund. And they're starting to make all these moves and all this noise. And we also know that they are responsible for yet another blockchain, which they like to say in the press is, quote, the Ethereum killer. And that is Solana. And so now the question would be, well, if the Ethereum blockchain is approved, And if everyone in the government is in the business of making lots of money, then why wouldn't you say, well, here is the spot Solana ETF next? Because these guys are paying a lot of money to market it. And literally you can't go one day without reading in the news that they're doing something. They just did a partnership with PayPal. Why is that interesting? Well, Andreessen Horowitz invested in PayPal like 14 years ago. It's
mafia.
all their old pals. It's all their old original mafia. And what does PayPal do? Well, they have a PayPal stablecoin, which is kind of like Tether, which is a stablecoin, which is kind of like USDC, which is a stablecoin. But does the Biden administration like stablecoins? No, because they think that their CBDC, their central bank digital currency, probably should be the stable coin, which is probably why they're trying to figure out how to, when they talk about pegging these things, are they just going to stick with the good old American dollar? Or are they going to peg it to a virtual digital stable version of that? And would they ever cede that to another company? Or would it have to be a government-made stablecoin to be our digital equivalent?
Here's a
so
hot
we don't
take for you.
de-dollarize ourselves. We're going to de-dollarize ourselves, Michael.
When you file an S1 to go public, do you file an S1 to go public on any exchange? You have to pick which exchange. You're either on NASDAQ or you're on New York Stock Exchange.
I think that's right, yeah.
So maybe by introducing a Texas stock exchange, all of a sudden there's an opportunity for these third tier ETFs to be traded. Maybe they say, nope, we're only going to trade the Bitcoin, the gold and the silver, the Bitcoin ETF and the ETH ETF. Those we'll take those over here on the tier one exchanges. But you guys over there in Texas, you guys want to trade shit coins and Solana ETFs on your exchange, go for it. It could be an interesting thought there that there could be almost a different regulatory approach taken with a different exchange saying, yeah, we'll trade these, we'll approve. I mean, how does a coin make its way onto Coinbase? Like, what is the threshold that, when is Pepe going to make its way? It's like the 18th most popular meme coin. It's not listed on Coinbase, but people don't really know why. I'm going to use this as a segue into speaking of meme coins. In all of this crazy timeline of SEC events, our boy Roaring Kitty and Dumb Money GameStop making headlines, like tweeting for the first time, sending GameStop once again through the roof, covering it on all the major morning shows, talking about this guy getting kicked off of Fidelity. This is interesting to me, right in the middle of what feels like a fever pitch around the regulatory climate, around the legislation, around the politicians and the politics around crypto. Here comes Dumb Money, Roaring Kitty with a few memes to get everybody worked up. And is he market manipulating? And if he's doing it, is he doing it inside the boundaries of what is currently considered legal? Is he, by tweeting something, it's he may be signaling to his friends, I'm buying, but he's not doing it in secret. And that is what makes insider trading illegal. When you do it in secret and you say, oh, I'm going to go pour a bunch of money into this, you should get in too, right? That's insider trading, not financial advice. I'm just teaching what this is. And if he's doing it on Twitter and he's doing it out loud, doesn't that seem like it should be allowed? He's a retail investor. I don't know your take on GameStop, meme stocks, but it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, it also comes down to what is the definition as the SEC, how the SEC defines that kind of market manipulation, because we also covered, many celebrities and many celebrity companies who famously had to go pay fines because of their very overt promotion of meme coins and of basically just garbage coins on what was then Twitter. And it was, everyone from Kim Kardashian to Paul Pierce and on down the line, Soulja Boy. But in this case, Roaring Kitty doesn't even say anything. Like, there isn't any text. There's not even an emoji that shows forward. A rocket. It just literally is a photograph of a human leaning forward, which you can really start to splice and argue now the nuances of what is modern communication. Like if you were to ask a lot of rational people who follow the market and know the story of Roaring Kitty, I think most people would say, yeah, if that guy posts that and hasn't done anything for 3 years, it probably indicates that he's buying something, right? It's insinuated. But there's plenty of people who insinuate. We talk about our politicians, the Congress people and the senators who insider trade all day long and are allowed to, basically, because they don't abide by the same laws as most normal people. And they're the ones making the laws. So this, again, screams to one of those, the underdog has, their ability to promote what they're doing on X, as you said, do it very public and in a way that is so far safe, because I haven't seen any articles that say anything about anyone coming after Roaring Kitty. And he's almost sort of like, he's like a demigod among certain people. And what really, when you were talking about consensus in Texas, just to get back to Texas for a second, all of a sudden, Texas is this like crucible for all things Web3. Already, Texas has successfully lured California companies to come to Texas with tax breaks and cheaper electricity. Tesla's moving there. Elon Musk loves Texas. Elon Musk was original PayPal. Elon was just tapped by Trump, or supposedly Trump claims that they had a conversation. He tapped him to be some major economic advisor in his new cabinet. You have Consensus, the event happening in Texas. You talk about the NASDAQ as this alternative to the New York Stock Exchange, which have kind of evolved to become the .com exchange, right? If you were a tech company, you were on the NASDAQ. You weren't on the New York Stock Exchange. That was the more old traditional companies. This is the new tech. Well, maybe that new tech is old tech, like you said. Maybe the Texas Stock Exchange, in some weird twist, represents Web3 crypto tokens, where really all of the NFT legislation, all the tokenization of random coins and assets, all those ownership and fractional ownership, maybe that is really ends up being what Texas sort of becomes, drops their flag and says, we are the protectors of the new economy. And then, of course, it speaks to, you talk about Mad Money and Roaring Kitty, who doesn't want to be left out. His movie came out too many years ago for anyone to remember. So he's got to make some noise. And then this movie Civil War just hits, which probably is a few months too soon, but basically shows a future where California and Texas march on New York and Washington and take it over because they cede. Like that is already in the public consciousness. And I feel like if you're Texas and you're smart, you want to double down on like what that is about. I mean, already you hear almost nothing of Abbott and his immigration policies. Like that used to be all that anyone talked about. Buses and planes landing with migrants being dropped off in random places. No, Abbott. And now it's, hey, we're just we're the new bastion of the original American capitalism. Come to Texas. We encourage your innovation. We'll host your business, and we'll host Consensus it was in Austin, which literally is kind of like that little blue purple dot right in the dead center of the great state of Texas, and suddenly are starting to take control of the microphone. And you talk about Bitcoin being on the ballot. One question I'll lob back to you. I was a little bit surprised. I am surprised to look and see that today we're recording and it's June, the first week of June. And the elections are in November. Like we're less than 6 months away. And yet we haven't really started hearing the AI, the Web3, the Bitcoin, the policy talks somehow have not gone into tech at all. And it makes me wonder if are politicians and just politicians, and are red and blue going to work together just to create legislation so that it doesn't become a political issue? Because I'm starting to think maybe they're just two shades of the same color. They want to control every one of these amazing new technologies and like money wells. And they know that if they fight about it too much, then they won't be able to take advantage of all that money. It just seems to me like I would have thought by now you and I would have heard candidates really arguing about what is the place of cryptocurrency in the modern American economy. And there's been zero talk of that, basically.
Well, the
only talk is, hey, we all want to take donations. Like, give me donations.
There is a debate coming up. The border security is sort of being taken off the table by the Biden administration in terms of it wouldn't be a differentiator if he's going to start limiting or closing the border. And so then to me, what's the next big issue? The economy. And if you start talking about jobs in the economy, I think that is going to lead you to talking about these new
AI.
Well, yeah, AI and
Maybe it's
jobs.
just, maybe that's where they leave it. It's just AI. I mean, don't make it too confusing.
I don't think so. I think that we saw some of the positions coming out a couple weeks ago, Trump making splashes, taking donations in crypto. I think Biden sweeping this under the rug, to me, is almost holding what could be the winning issue in his back pocket. Give him the summer to iron out those details, to line up those dominoes. I predicted this early on that we were going to see a flurry of market activity, and you're starting to see it. We had this Robinhood announcing this acquisition of Bitstamp. The Sandbox, a traditional Web3 DAO, just raised $20 million at $1 billion valuation. You're seeing, you're starting to see what looks like to me some kind of natural consolidation happening in the Web3 market. I mean, Robinhood acquiring, what looks like a crypto company. That's interesting. You're seeing a new exchange set up in Texas. That to me is the start of this flurry of market activity. I think that continues through the summer, and you wind up with what could be the winning issue that says the thing that is driving this economy forward in this new AI world. The reason that we're able to leverage this new AI technology and make money from it is because we're putting all that AI stuff onto the blockchain. We're keeping track of these transactions. We know who's creating what, how people are being compensated for what they create. I mean, that's a long way to get to by November, but I do think that you will get CBDC clarification. I think the ETH ETF will happen before November, and I don't know what's next. I mean, we have to start thinking even crazy to start thinking past November, which is going to be really hard, I think, for us as we stare down that pipeline. It does feel like it will be such a momentous occasion, and I hope that we have clarity around crypto before then, so that it isn't, to your point, so that it isn't a political issue, that it can be ironed out before the election. In fact, my prediction that it might be the winning issue, which may be why Biden put it in a back pocket, swept it under the rug with the Fit 21 bill, and keeps it there so that we can iron out all these other details and then bring it forward for a final vote. That's
so a little bit like playing some geopolitical Uno, if you will. Putin's got a handful of cards. Netanyahu's got a handful of cards. We'll give Macron and a few others some cards. We know Xi Jinping's got some cards. Biden's got cards. Trump's got cards. And what we're saying is Biden's got a wild draw 4 in his back pocket, which is if push comes to shove before the election, and he needs to pour gas on the fire that is the economy, and then pull out one of those wild draw 4s and say, change the color of the whole conversation, and say, oh, by the way, in allowing this, in using an executive order to make this so, I just made this many billions of dollars for American companies because of unlocking all this value. I could see something like that. But again, let's not also forget, China is still selling munitions to Russia. Russia is, quote, having the best gains in their incursion to date. Like, these articles come by and it's as if no one remembers that there is a war happening right now in Ukraine and with Russia, and then they're saying, oh, 2 years and change in. Oh, by the way, just so you guys know, Russia's doing a really good job now. That's the news. Okay. And now you have straight up Israeli forces dropping American-made ordnance onto UN-run schools. And then they just say, sorry, there were some bad guys hiding under there, and they keep moving. Like, it seems to me that there's a pressure cooker of the geopolitical stuff that should also become front and center as they go through these debates and these negotiations, because they also, Biden and Trump, couldn't be on further sides of those positions, you know? But yeah, it's interesting. I'll think more about the get out of jail free card, the wild draw 4, because that could be a way to move the narrative 100% to the left, especially when you use your own CBDC as a foil. Like, wouldn't that be a cool trick? Take the CBDC off the table just at the time you kind of reintroduce what you need to in the crypto world. Maybe it's one of those Chinese spy balloon moves on the part of Biden, like you say.
Yep. Yeah, final thought on that, but continue to think through it. It may be, in retrospect, we may be able to explain why this week, in the last 10 days, feels so mixed messages. And also that it felt so out of nowhere. We've been covering this stuff for a long time, and all of a sudden, within 10 days, you got congressmen on the record on a vote on digital assets that didn't exist before. They had to show their cards. Yeah. So the game is there, and now it's been pocketed. The whole game, where everyone knows it's a bipartisan issue. It is a bipartisan winning issue. You had more bipartisan votes, Democrats and Republicans, saying yes to this bill than anything else that has come before Biden. Why wouldn't he have approved it? Well,
yeah, they literally than anything else.
They know that it's a winning issue. So hold it. Hold it till you need it. We'll leave it there. We've got a lot to cover. We'll do it again next week.
Great catching up. I can't wait to pick it up.
On-chain summer, baby. Let's roll.
On-chain summer. Stay vigilant. Stay diamond-handed, baby. Bitcoin keeps going north, north, north.
Peace.
Talk to you next time.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Off the Record, on the Rocks. Join us next week for more news and all things Web3. Check, please.